When our witnesses are at the table. We should probably begin. They're not here. Good morning, everyone. Is Lily? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to defer to the two of you, and then I'll turn the meeting over to them.
Okay.
I understand, but it's up to plenty of your left. And so what we're going to do is have opening, and then we'll turn it over to them when they come in, so that we can. Here's the. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Yeah, I know you're out there. I see you. Thank you all very much for being here. We consider this a very special morning. It is a morning when we have special guest, Ms. Lilly Ledbetter, our inspiration and our champion, Dr. Heidi Hartman, who is an expert and we look forward to hearing from, and Ms. Laura Moy, who was at our When Women Succeed, America Succeeds event in San Francisco a week and a half ago. They will be more fully introduced by Congresswoman DeLauro and Representative Andrews when they come, and I guess my microphone wasn't on, but I won't start over. I say it's a special day because last night we heard the President of the United States speak so eloquently about the importance of women in the workplace. When women succeed, America succeeds. It was a triumphant moment for our message on this, more important than that, for our crusade that we are on to have work and home balance in what we do. Because so much will be said about our witnesses, and their testimony is what we came to hear, and because our two co-chairs are still coming over from the floor, I'm going to immediately turn over the floor to the co-chairs, or the chair of the women's, it has a very long name, the Democratic Women's Working Group. Donna Edwards is chairing that and works closely with Congresswoman Doris Matsui. I mention them because they have been very much a part of the When Women Succeed, America Succeeds crusade that we have had across the country. All of it inspired by our godmother on these issues, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, and she will be here shortly to preside over this meeting. But fresh from being with the President in Prince George's County in Maryland and giving us a report on that, Congresswoman Donna Edwards. Thank you, Donna.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Leader, and good morning to everyone. And I look forward to hearing from our co-chairs and particularly hearing from our witnesses as we get started today. As the leader said, as the chair of the Democratic Women's Working Group with my vice chair, our vice chair, Doris Matsui of California, and our leader, and of course our godmother, Rosa DeLauro, we have really kicked off a true economic agenda for women that recognizes the economic status of women and says that there are very concrete things that we can do to improve the lives of women and, of course, their families as contributors in our economy. And as the leader indicated, I just came from Prince George's County out in my district where the president kicks off his tour across the country following up on that very powerful State of the Union message, identifying at the top of that list a topic that we have today, and that is equal pay for equal work. When, as the president pointed out, and we know that women make 77 cents on the dollar, and for African American and Latina women, that number is under 60 cents on a dollar. What that means is that families across this nation are deprived of income. Women are deprived of income, but families, children are deprived of that income as well. And so I look forward to our testimony today. I look forward to learning more and taking a message all across this country that really does say that when we invest in women, it makes a difference. When women succeed, America truly does succeed. Thank you, Madam Leader.
Thank you, Madam Leader, and thank you all to our witnesses for joining us today. You know, I believe that when a woman sits down at her kitchen table after her kids have gone to bed and she's paying her bills and balancing her checkbook, she should feel confident that the paycheck she earned that week is fair and equal to her coworkers, that she'll be able to pay for her rent or mortgage, for food on the table, and child care for her kids, and have enough left over for retirement savings. This is by no means asking for very much, and Congress has the ability to improve these women's lives and strengthen our economy by passing When Women Succeed, America Succeeds economic agenda. These kitchen table issues are faced by women in my home district in Sacramento. When I met recently with working mothers on the issues that they most cared about, I heard loud and clear that many feel squeezed between the responsibilities of motherhood and providing for elderly parents. While we can't add more hours in the day for these women, we can certainly ensure their wages are fair and equal, their early childhood education and child care are affordable and dependable, and that they can take a paid sick day when they have a child or parent who needs to be taken to the doctor. Again, thank you, Leader Pelosi, Representatives DeLauro and Andrews, for organizing this hearing for the Women's Economic Agenda, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you, Madam Leader.
One of our new members of Congress who's been a champion on this issue is going to say a few words of introduction. Thank you for your leadership, Congressman Eric Swalwell.
Thank you, Madam Leader, and it is my honor to welcome to this hearing today Laura Matsui from San Ramon, California, of California's 15th Congressional District. And Laura is a licensed marriage and family therapist who owns Conscious Roots, a psychotherapy practice in Oakland. Her practice is dedicated to offering fair and affordable psychological services and counseling to patients. She is a successful business owner who also understands the challenges many women face in today's economy. But what stands out about Laura is her advocacy on this issue, which is rooted in the fact that she has an identical advanced degree as her husband and previously landed the same job as her husband with the same company. But the only difference that was not identical is their pay. And I look forward to hearing from you, Laura, and also what we can do here to advance equality in pay and make sure that every woman receives the same pay when they do the same job as a man. So thank you, Leader, for hosting this, and welcome, Laura, to Washington.
I have to say that when Laura testified at our hearing in San Francisco a week and a half ago, her husband was in the audience when we went through the fact that she had a superior academic, professional record, and he got paid more. And she said everything was okay when they went home, as he was babysitting for their little boy while she was up there presiding at the meeting. Mr. Hoyer, thank you for joining us to our distinguished whip. Do you have a few words of welcome?
I do. A very famous American once said, when women succeed, when women succeed,
America succeeds.
And you recall last night the president said, when women succeed, America succeeds. And the young woman sitting next to me was beaming. Lilly Ledbetter, we are all proud to be with you. Thank you so much for your contribution to this effort.
Before I yield the floor to our distinguished
Have I
chair.
finished?
Oh, I thought I heard applause. We always like to end with applause.
when women succeed, men ought to shut up, I think. The message.
I like the applause. I just heard the applause.
I just want to say that I'm glad to be able to participate in this hearing as we focus on the challenge of which Eric Swalwell and Laura, you just faced. I have 3 daughters. I have no sons. I have a grandson, but I have 3 daughters. There is no reason in God's green earth why they should not be treated equally with their male counterparts, period. There's no room for argument on that. And therefore, this effort is central to America's sense of justice, fairness, and equal protection. And I am pleased to join in this hearing to hear the testimony of 3 leaders in our country on this very issue. And my daughters each thank you for your leadership. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Distinguished Whip Hoyer. Before I turn it over to our presiding officer, our convener, our godmother of these issues, I just want to acknowledge how honored we are that Congressman George Miller, Chairman George Miller, when the Lilly Ledbetter bill was passed, he was the leader on this subject, and the two, between your inspiration and his legislative virtuosity, here we have a legacy. George, did you want to say some words of welcome to begin?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm so excited to be here with Lilly and all of you that supported this effort. I told her last night, I didn't know her when we invited her to our hearing on this issue where her pay was stolen from her over many years and the loss of those benefits. But the minute she opened her mouth and started talking to this committee, I leaned over and I said, "We win this one." Thank you so much, Lilly. Thank you for being with us and all your advocacy around the country.
As many have, as you heard earlier, when we, he's not coming. When we, in our preliminary comments, you've heard Congresswoman DeLauro, the chair of the Steering Policy Committee, referred to as the godmother on these issues. And indeed, she is relentless, persistent, dissatisfied, impatient, and effective every day because of how important it is. And it is true. When women succeed, America, our country succeeds. It is a fact. It is not a slogan. It is a fact. And she created all of this, the scientific background as to how we would say it, the mobilization for it around the country, the intellectual basis for the ingredients that are in it, and the ability to attract so many excellent witnesses to testify to this need. This is a crusade, and our leader in all of it is the chair of the Steering Policy Committee, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro.
Thank you very much, Madam Leader. And you just said that this is a crusade, and you are the chief crusader. And thank you for being all over the country and for leading the way for all of us on making sure that women's economic issues are focused on in this nation. And a thank you to my colleagues, Congresswoman Donna Edwards and Congresswoman Matsui, for heading up the working group, and to all my colleagues who are here. And I would endorse as well, George Miller, who was, I say that because it's hard for any of us to believe that he is leaving. He has been a pioneer in so many ways, and certainly on this issue. And whether it has been for Lilly Ledbetter or taking up the charge for paycheck fairness, George Miller has been there. It was 50 years ago, President, yes. 50 years ago, President Kennedy's commission on the status of women, its final report to the nation, recommendations, equal pay, paid maternity leave, and enhanced access to child care. We've made progress, but women and families are still waiting for these reforms to be made real in 2014. You know the figures. Women make 77 cents on the dollar on average compared to men. That's less income for the entire family. They're more likely to live in poverty, to go bankrupt, and to have less pension security. They make up 2 out of 3 workers making the minimum wage. You have almost half of private sector workers who do not have access to one paid sick day, and we are the only advanced economy in the world without paid maternity leave. Too many families are finding that childcare is their biggest expense, sometimes bigger than a mortgage. And for women to succeed, for this country to succeed, for America to succeed, we need to address the continuing problems. We need policies that reflect the way women and families live and work today, and that give women the opportunity to create a better life and a better future for themselves and for their families. We listen to women all over the country. No one went into a closet one day and said we ought to focus on this. Substantial data, Heidi and others, for what you have done, we say thank you. We talk to women all over this country and men, and that's how this agenda was put forward, to focus on rising pay, work-life balance, and child care. And what we intend to do is to finish the work that started 50 years ago. The panel is going to talk about these issues. To begin the discussion, I have great privilege and the opportunity to introduce someone who is a hero to all of us here. And Madam Leader, you were there last night. It was the young women. When they saw Lilly, they said, oh my God, they just gravitated right to her, and they said, because they know what a difference she is already making in their lives. She is a living legend. Her story is well known. Decades as an area manager and supervisor for Goodyear, she found out through an anonymous tip that she had been underpaid for her entire career. She fought back, took the story all the way to the Supreme Court, and because she refused to be silent in the face of terrible injustice, because she exhibited strength, perseverance in seeing that a wrong was made right, she has helped to transform the lives of millions of American women for the better. It's the 5th anniversary today, and this is a great way to mark it, Lilly, restoring women's right to challenge pay discrimination in court. And the law is on the books because of your fight, you and your family, and the fight that you continue to wage against inequity. That was the first step, as Lilly will tell you herself, and we are on our way. And with that, we have our co-chair of the Steering and Policy, Mr. Andrews, come forward, and Mr. Andrews will speak and introduce our Dr. Hartman.
Dr. Hartman.
Yes. Wait a minute.
I'll do this standing up. As a
Here
member
you
of the
go.
standing committee, I will do that. I apologize, Dr. Hartman.
Today's your time.
Do we have Dr. Hartman's
Sit down
file?
right here.
You
right
have
there.
it. No, that's not it. I do. Where is it? Hold on. Oh, damn.
You have,
You got it. Okay.
Dr. Hartman is the founder and president of the Institute for Women's Policy Research, which she created in 1987 to meet the need for women-centered policy-oriented research. The Institute is one of the flagship organizations in terms of policy research in the field. For 25 years, it has proven to be a critical resource in examining women's equity and economic situation in America. She's co-authored several reports dealing with this subject. Her work has been translated to more than a dozen languages. She lectures widely on women, economics, and public policy. She's an invaluable resource. Welcome, Dr. Hartman. We're glad you're with us. I apologize for being tardy. Where are you from, Dr. Hartman? Very good. Well, welcome. It's good to have a fellow New Jersey. All of our bridges are open today. We're very happy.
We're going to start the testimony with Lilly Ledbetter, followed by Laura Matsui, and then followed by Dr. Hartman. So we will begin the testimony.
Thank you to Leader Pelosi, the members of the Steering and Policy Committee, and my friends at the American Association of University Women for inviting me here today to speak about equal pay on the 5th anniversary of the signing of my law, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. And I have to, on a personal note, thank Congressman Miller, Steny Horner, all of you good people and great friends in this room who's lobbied and put me in the history books. Thank you. So I'm there. Thank you. I started at Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company in 1979, believing that my family would have a better life and I would be able to help contribute to our income, which my husband's checks were not going far enough. We were coming up short, sitting around that kitchen table trying to figure out how we would make our bills, get paid, and get through the month. I was the only female in that supervisory position, and it didn't take me long to figure out that I would have to work harder and smarter. I'd better not be out. I'd better not be a minute late. I'd better do a little bit more than my male coworkers, or I would not have my job, because so many women had come through the years and not licensed it. It was a good job, and I strived extremely hard to catch up and to meet their coworkers' salaries, but there was just no way. And then when I got that anonymous note showing, after 19 years of working 12-hour shifts, night shift, anything that was passed on to me, that I was being paid 40% less than my male counterparts that had the exact same job. The first initial thought was my overtime hours, how much my family had been shorted, how much we had done without, how little my children had had when they should have had more. Also, the next thought was my retirement, my contributory retirement, my 401k, and oh yes, Social Security. All of those are shortchanged. And that's when my battle began for fair pay. I just could not let it go. It wound up, my case did, all the way to the Supreme Court. And when the Supreme Court came back in 2007 and said Goodyear had been paying me unfairly long enough to make it legal, I knew I wasn't ready to give up fighting for fair pay, because it was no longer about me, but it was about every American family across this country. Every working woman ever must be represented. And in the 5 years since we've had that bill, it's made progress. It put a lot of people back to give them the right to file a charge and to go to court like I did and stand up for their rights. People have asked me, why didn't I let it go in the beginning? This was not right. I was 2 years away from retirement, but I could not let it go. It was not the law. I had been mistreated, and worse than that, my family. Today, I suffer because my retirement checks, my retirement and my Social Security are 40% less than what I should be getting. And I'm just the tip of the iceberg. Women across this country are living the same life, struggling, oftentimes moving into their children's homes. The economic agenda addresses the key challenges facing women and families today, including the need for equal pay, child care, and paid leave. Until our nation's elected officials take action to make these necessities a reality for working women, families will continue to struggle. It doesn't have to be this way. It's so simple to me to get the laws straightened out and everybody play by the rules. That's fair. The Paycheck Fairness Act represents a key piece of the women's economic agenda, but is unfortunately stalled due to congressional gridlock. That's why I'm working with AAUW to urge President Obama, a friend who has been vocal in his commitment to equal pay, to act right now to close the gender gap. The president could issue an executive order that would ban the federal retaliation. That's exactly why I got caught where I was, because I had no way of finding out exactly what my pay was relative to my male coworkers. They didn't share information, and if we discussed it, we didn't have a job. Our jobs would be let go. And often places, even that people can find out, if they ask about pay, they no longer have a job. This is critical on the retaliation, and I'm so grateful to all of you people in this room who've championed the Lilly Ledbetter bill and who will go forward and make many changes for our future generations in the United States. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Laura? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura. Can you hear me? There you go. As Representative Swalwell said, my name is Laura, and I'm from San Ramon, California, and I have a private practice in Oakland. and I'm here today to speak about my own personal experience with wage discrimination. I'd like to thank Leader Pelosi and Moms Rising for inviting me here to share my story, and Lilly Ledbetter, I'm just honored to be sitting next to you. So I'm a little emotional. So, from my education and training and hearing stories from women around me, I've always known about the wage gap between men and women, the unjust, sad reality that men earn significantly more than women for performing the same job. And I thought that this shocking disparity would never happen to me for two reasons. I was born and raised in America, thinking and believing that all men are created equal. And number two, I worked really hard, often 2 to 3 jobs at a time, to be able to attend prestigious universities so that I can compete in a male-dominated world. Having obtained my BA from UC Berkeley and my master's from Columbia, I naively thought my degrees would help level out the playing field. I also thought that the field of mental health would not and could not allow this kind of injustice. I thought this because as therapists and social workers, we see just how psychologically, socially, physically, and emotionally debilitating it is to be discriminated against. Every day we support people who, based on overlapping layers of discrimination based on their gender, their race, their class, their sexual orientation, their age, ability, and non-acceptance of different spiritualities. So when the discrimination happened to me personally, within the very profession that seeks to mitigate its impact, I was at the very least disenchanted. And while wage discrimination based on gender is often difficult to prove, I was in a unique position to find out, because the person who's earning more than me doing the very same job was my partner and now husband. You see, we met 9 years ago as graduate students at Columbia. We graduated together with the exact same degree. 2 years later, we became employed by the same agency for the exact same position, and we were dumbfounded by our initial salary offers. At his first job within the field of mental health, straight out of school, he was offered $41,000 a year. I was offered $35,700. We both naturally actually believed that I would earn more than him for several straightforward reasons. Prior to grad school, I worked in the field of mental health for 5 years. I hold outstanding references, and I also hold a California school counseling credential, all of which substantially beefed up my resume in comparison to my husband's. And yet my salary offer was more than $5,000 less. The only reasons that we could possibly think of to account for this were 2 other straightforward differences. I am female and Chinese American. My husband is white and male. Every day at work, I provide therapeutic services to underserved youth and their families, and this knowledge burned my very being. I felt demeaned, disrespected, devalued, less than a man, and by extension, less than a human. This knowledge also affected my relationship with my husband. At times, it was difficult to be around him, knowing that I had more experience, more skills, worked every bit as hard, and yet was still paid less. Often, my husband asked me for help with issues faced on the job, yet I was the one earning less money. In short, I was just not as valuable. We even attempted to fix or at least mediate our situation with the agency by asking them why there was such a remarkable difference in our pay. However, we were given the runaround. Emails, phone calls, and letters were left unanswered, and we could not afford a lawyer, so in the end, we just had to accept it. At least in our case, the difference in salary was still going to the same place, but the wage discrimination still remains a horrible injustice. In the 2 years I was there, I made over $10,000 less than my husband, equating to $400 a month. This could have helped us with rent, access to healthy food, childcare, and other child-related expenses, among many others. This disparity impacted not only my income at the time, but future earnings at other organizations, Social Security benefits, and equally important, my self-esteem and my sense of self-worth. My story is sadly very real and likely very common. Millions of women across the country are getting paid less than their male coworkers, but have no idea because of the secrecy surrounding employee salaries in most workplaces. My husband and I were in the unique position to compare our salaries for the same position and experience this disparity firsthand. So we are committed to using this knowledge to help raise consciousness about wage discrimination and transform the way our society views and values women. Because when women succeed, America succeeds, plain and simple. Thank you so much for listening and the opportunity to share my story.
Dr. Hartman.
Thank you and good morning. I am honored to participate today with Lilly and Laura. As we all know, since the passage of the Equal Pay Act and the Civil Rights Act in 1963 and 1964, the wage gap between men and women has narrowed, but it still remains significant. In fact, it's at 23.5% in 2012. Back in 1963, that gap was 41.1%. The economic progress that women have made in the past 5 decades is enormous. Women have entered a raft of occupations that formerly were virtually closed to them, and they earn more over their lifetimes and contribute more to family income and to the economy as a whole than ever before. But there's still a long way to go, despite the passage of the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009, which makes it easier for women to sue for equal pay and avoid the plight that Lilly found herself in. Progress toward closing the pay gap has actually stagnated. Since 2000, the wage ratio has remained around 76.5%. It has only been substantially higher in 3 of the last 13 years. A survey conducted by my institute, the Institute for Women's Policy Research, found that, like Lilly, many workers do not know what others are being paid and are unlikely to be able to find out. Our survey shows that more than 60% of private sector workers responded to a question about whether their wages can be discussed freely in their workplace by indicating that either they are strongly discouraged from doing so, or it is prohibited, or they could be punished for doing so. Only about 15%, on the other hand, of public sector workers report being discouraged, and the gender wage gap is much smaller in the public sector than in the private sector. I believe that the widespread pay secrecy in the United States fosters a climate in which wage discrimination against women and minorities is perpetuated. Economists, like myself, do not know all the reasons for the stall in the progress in closing the wage gap, but they have shown that public and workplace policies make a difference. Our researchers at the Institute for Women's Policy Research have shown that if women received pay equal to comparable men, the poverty rate for all working women and their families would fall by half, from 8.1% to 3.9%. The poverty rate of families of working single mothers would fall by nearly half, from 29% to 15%. 43 million working women, about 60% of all working women, would receive a pay increase. Moreover, the GDP would be increased by nearly $500 billion, half a trillion, about the equivalent of adding another state the size of Virginia to the nation. So it is clear that when women succeed, the nation succeeds. In a recent research paper, David Cooper at EPI demonstrates that an increase in the federal minimum wage would have a substantial impact in raising wages for 28 million workers, nearly a fifth of all working Americans, who would be directly and indirectly affected by an increase in the federal minimum wage to $10.10 per hour across the 3 years, 2014 to 2016. About 1/3 of these workers would be indirectly affected by increases in the federal minimum, because wages in the jobs that have traditionally paid more than the minimum would also be increased when the federal minimum is increased. Cooper shows that women would constitute 55% of the workers affected by the minimum wage, and 15.3 million women would receive a pay increase. The typical minimum wage worker is not young. She or he is 35 years of age and provides half her or his family income. Nearly 1/5 of American children have at least one parent whose earnings would be raised by an increase in the federal minimum to $10.10 per hour. And moreover, 2.3 single mothers, or nearly 1/3 of all working single mothers, would be directly or indirectly affected by the increase in the federal minimum wage, and they also would receive a pay increase. These data make the case that implementing new laws and public policies is urgent. American women and low-wage workers are losing out on the economic growth that the United States is currently experiencing, and paying women equally and raising the minimum wage would reduce poverty and grow the U.S. economy. Thank you.
Well done. I want to thank our panelists and for what is both a powerful and personal stories about this issue and how important it is. Going to now invite my colleagues to ask questions, and we're going to try to get the questions in nearly the order in which people arrived, so don't get annoyed if it's a little bit out of order. But I'm going to ask if you can just keep your comments to 2 minutes. We have a lot of folks who want to get their questions answered, and I would like to begin with Ms. Schakowsky, who is the Vice Chair of the Steering and Policy Committee.
Well, I just want to thank all of you. I wanted to ask Laura, did you bring it to the attention of your employer that the two of you were hired and at different wages? What happens if you try that?
We did. I tried to, well, I wrote an email to my director and supervisor, and I was given, the meeting kept getting pushed back to talk about it. We tried to go to the executive director of the company. He was very hard, or agency, and he was very hard to reach. And when we finally did sit down and talk with human resources to try to get this settled, I was given 2 other reasons for the difference, which I had to just accept. And they were, I was at a different school site, and my husband speaks Spanish.
Lilly, what would have happened to you if you would have, at the beginning, asked your colleagues, people you were working with, your male counterparts, what they were earning?
I wouldn't have had a job. We were told when we hired in and filled out our withholding papers, if you discuss your pay, you will not work here. And in previous times, they had had a handbook. A few people that had been there several years had a handbook that had that stated. I never got one, but they would let you go, and if you just bring up your pay to someone and it gets out, you would be let go.
And Heidi, how common is that?
Extremely common. Our survey showed 60% of American workers, slightly more women than men, feel they would be penalized or they know it's discouraged at their workplace. And yes, some of them do lose their jobs. I don't know how many. We don't know how many. Our survey in 2010 is so far still the only survey that has asked workers that question.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Great questions and answers. Congresswoman Bonamici from Oregon.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for being here. What I really appreciate is your sense of justice. And Lilly, when you told your story, that reminded us all of how important that is to step up and speak out when it's important. I represent a district in Oregon, and the city of Portland in Oregon is one of the cities that just joined a list of others and passing a paid sick leave policy. And yes, that deserves applause.
Yes, it does.
Connecticut was first. Connecticut was first.
However, that's just for people who work in the city, and so we really need a broader approach to that. But certainly, as we watch that be implemented and look at the other cities and the other jurisdictions that have passed paid sick leave, we can see that it is successful, that it can work. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, obviously the Paycheck Fairness Act is important. The equal pay for equal work, which has been the law since 1963, and still we have not seen equal pay for equal work. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Equal Rights Amendment and whether, there are people here with us who have been working on that for years, and it started way back in the 20s. So there's been a renewed effort to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed, and I wondered if you just might talk about whether you think that would have made a difference to Lilly and to Laura, to others, if the Equal Rights Amendment had been in effect.
I think, yes, it's very hard to, pinpoint what the economic impact of that would be, but there are still so many laws on the books that are discriminatory in various ways, and it would have had, the main effect on that. And I think it also sets a climate. I think, when the president leads by saying when women succeed, America succeeds, right. When he shows employers that are doing the right thing and features them, and when you pass an Equal Rights Amendment, it has a message, to the whole society about what is important. So I do believe it would make an important difference.
Sure. Thank you. And one other thing I wanted to mention is the importance of access to higher education. I see my time has expired, but I want to thank Congressman Miller for working on that issue. And I just introduced a bill today to help with a pay-it-forward approach to study access to higher education to help close that gap. So thank you all for being here, and I yield back.
Thank you. Congresswoman Susan Davis, California.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here, for sharing your story. One of the things we do hear from time to time, and I think it's been mentioned, that there may in fact be other ways, and there have been other ways of closing the wage gap. EITC, of course, is mentioned as one. I wonder if you could elaborate on other policies that we, in addition to focusing on the minimum wage, should be talking about right now. And could you include in that entry-level experiences or re-entry experiences that women are seeking in order to get back into the economic circle right now?
Yes, if I can. Right now, I mean, with this recession and the lack of jobs, people have become unemployed, and those who have become re-employed have that re-entry problem. And in general, we know that whenever anyone takes time out of the labor force, whether it's lack of work, whether it's to raise children, to take care of elders, they will come back on average at a lower wage. So anything we could do through job training efforts to prepare women and men for reentry would be extremely important. I think the other thing is that for women, so much of the reason they stay out is family care. If we could pass the paid leave bill, the Family Act, and which would cover paid sick days and paid family leave at the federal level, that would be extremely important, because it's through, you know, what we say in the profession, strengthening and lengthening your labor force experience, that you accumulate human capital and you accumulate your wage growth over the years. Lilly had all of that and was, you know, punished for being female, but she stuck it out. She stayed in there and she kept working, and as has Laura and as have I. But so many people must take off for various reasons, and they should not be penalized for that.
Thank you. If I could just take a second, because people are running for airplanes and so forth, I just want to acknowledge that Congressman Chris Van Hollen was here, who was a ranking member on our budget committee and had to leave. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas, Congresswoman Betty McCollum of Minnesota, and Congresswoman Terry Sewell from Alabama. And Catherine Clark, our newly elected member from Massachusetts. Congresswoman Moore from Wisconsin.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I guess my question, I just want to thank the panel for being here. This is just outrageous. It really is what has happened to you, Laura and Lilly. But I guess my question would be to you, Heidi. We heard in the case of Laura, the raison d'etre was that he spoke Spanish. They came up with an excuse or a reason afterwards. Lilly, in Lilly's case, they just said the statute of limitations had passed, even though she had no way of knowing it. What strategies could we employ in terms of drafting our legislation succinctly to get around these excuses? And part one of my question, and what happens when they're not exactly the same job, but the notion of comparable worth comes in, that what they're doing is comparable, if not the exact same job. How can we, close the loophole of excuses that an employer could come up with?
Well, probably will be a long time from now before we can close all the loopholes for all the excuses they can come up with, as we all know. But I do think you've pinpointed something, the comparable worth issue of very often they say, well, it's not the same job. And that can be litigated in court. Is it close enough of a job to be covered by equal pay? And the courts have sometimes been expansive about that. But the other issue is a nurse worth less than an engineer. Is a parking lot attendant worth more than a child care worker? Well, they're often paid more than a child care worker. And these issues have been addressed in state civil service systems, and they actually could be addressed more directly in the federal civil service system as well. But more than half the states have adjusted their state civil services to pay women in female-dominated categories more, actually to pay men and women in female-dominated categories more, and men lose out too when they work in a female-dominated job category, even though you know, they might be perfectly comparable to a male-dominated job category, but they pay less simply because it's female-dominated. So Representative Norton and Senator Harkin have long had a bill addressing the comparable worth issue, and like the Paycheck Fairness Act, it also addresses knowing your wage rates. You know, Paycheck Fairness talks about not being retaliated. The Harkin-Norton bill talks about employers having to reveal pay rates by occupational category so that you can compare within and across.
Thank you very much. Congresswoman Lucille Roybal-Allard from California.
Okay. Thank you very much for being here. Dr. Hartman, you stated in your testimony that the wage gap has narrowed in some areas. Could you elaborate on what groups of women or professions it has narrowed, and where women are more disadvantaged by unequal pay than others?
Well, I am pleased to say it has pretty much narrowed across the board. Older women, younger women, women of color. But there are areas where the wage gap is bigger, and actually one of them is for the more educated women, because at the top, there's no limit to salaries. When you're looking at people without high school or high school only or part of college education, you know, there's kind of a maximum that men work in those occupations. But so for college educated women, there's, you know, particularly large loss. I mean, it's estimated to be at least $1 million over the course of their lifetimes for the college educated, but also women of color, as Representative Edwards mentioned. Hispanic women, Latin American women, Native American women, all make substantially more, less than white men than white women do. And I would also, you know, point out that single mothers often have an extremely difficult time in the labor market. They have to find a job that's going to allow them to get to and from work, to and from childcare, to and from school, and have the hours that work, and so they have a higher unemployment rate, usually double of what other women have. And they typically, our research shows, they typically work in the jobs that are the least family-friendly, that have the most punishment for sharing wage information, the least friendly supervisors to allow them to just come in a little bit later, leave a little bit early. And, you know, that's a real need. You mentioned access to education. I think the more we could improve access to good job training and higher education for all women, especially once you become a parent, it's very difficult to finish college, and I think we could have more supports for student parents. And I am pleased to hear, by the way, that Vice President Biden is going to be straightening out our job training programs. I'm sure Mr. Miller is looking forward to that.
I see that my time is up, but I do want to throw in to the discussion when we're talking about economic challenges, the challenges that are faced by women who are victims of domestic violence, and those who are also immigrant women who are often, you know, in violent situations, cannot leave because of their financial dependence on their spouse. And I have introduced for many, many years a bill called the SAFE Act, which would allow women who are victims of domestic violence to take leave, to go to court, to take care of their needs of themselves and their family, and also to be able to get unpaid leave in order, and unemployment benefits. And it's almost impossible to get any movement on that. So that's another challenge facing many women in this country.
I just want to mention that some of the states have been successful. Their paid sick, or cities, their paid sick days laws allow that time off for violence issues. And also some of the states have passed making that reason for leaving work eligible for unemployment benefits. I believe Wisconsin is one such state. But thank you for that work. That's so important, really.
Thank you. Congresswoman Lowy, New York, who is the ranking member of our Appropriations Committee.
Well, I thank you to my good friends, to our leader, Nancy Pelosi, to Chairwoman DeLauro. As he walks out, our distinguished ranking member, activist George Miller, Chairman Andrews, and to all my colleagues. I really want to thank the panel, especially Lilly Ledbetter, who's been working with us for so many, many years. And
Thank you all for bringing these issues to our attention. But we all know that the battle is far from over, and we all have personal tales in our district. I just was shocked as I was preparing for this, looking at the New York statistics and what it really means, because although it's not 77 cents, it's 83 cents for every dollar paid to men, it's still a yearly gap of 8,658. And I looked at a study that the National Partnership for Women brought to my attention. Collectively, women in New York lose approximately $24 billion each year due to the wage gap. That is a lot of money. What does it mean? Leveling the playing field would provide the average New York woman 67 more weeks of food, 4 more months of mortgage and utility payments, 8 more months of rent, 29 more months of family health insurance.
Will the
payments.
gentlelady yield for 1 second? I just want to
Always
introduce
yield to you.
Congresswoman Michelle Lujan Grisham, who is here, but she has to leave as folks are trying to catch airplanes and trains and automobiles here.
And
Sorry.
another thing, 2,283 additional gallons of gas. And what I have found in talking to women in New York, and again, you think many of them are more sophisticated, but that's not the case because this spans industry, education level, and remains a problem when accounting for personal choices such as having children. I was amazed to find that GAO found that working mothers pay a penalty for having children while fathers get paid more. That's really an amazing statistic. So I just want to thank you all, particularly Lilly, who I've known for so long. And thank you for those who are chairing this, because these statistics are astonishing. And this is not middle America, this is New York, where you think because of all the assistance, legal assistance, people who speak out, that these statistics wouldn't be real there as well. So I don't have a question, but I do want to thank our leaders for doing so much, and Donna as well, and Doris, to bring these issues to our attention. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And let me now ask Congresswoman Carol Shea Porter from New Hampshire.
Thank you. And first of all, Lilly, I'd like to say that I was in the room on the Education Labor Committee when you testified, and it was so moving and actually shocking, the story that you had to tell. And I was privileged to be there when the law was signed. So I want to thank you and say that actually you really are down in history, as you know. But last night, when I was at the Leaders for an event, I had an 11-year-old boy with me. And when they said Lilly Ledbetter's here, he forgot all the rest of us in that room. He's 11 years old, and he knew who you were, and he wanted to meet you. So this is the impact you're going to have. So my question, and thank you for your very eloquent story, and it is shocking, you know, what you're talking about there, and thank you also, Doctor. But Lilly, I'd like you to tell us where you've been since then, and what have you sensed going out in the public across the country? Has the mood changed? Is your message resonating more? Have you found that there's a better understanding, or are we still almost in the same spot we were when you first told your story?
Thank you. Actually, for the pay, we're still at the same place we were 5 years ago, but the astounding thing has been to me is the request I get to speak at universities and colleges, even high schools, and it's around the world. The first invitation I had after the bill was signed was to Rome, Italy. The Washington attorney and I went to Rome, Italy for 6 days to share my story. We started with a union there. The Italian ministries brought me in. I've been contacted by Chile, Japan. My book was just released last week in Japanese. It's been translated. They're interested. They're studying it in the universities. And the London, England. I did a radio program for them. The interest is worldwide. I thought in the beginning this is just a Southern problem. These white men down here are keeping control of the money. But it didn't take long to find out it was north to south, east to west. But what I learned, people recognize me in the airports and when I travel, and they'll come up, they want to know, are you the real Lilly Ledbetter? That's me. But then they've got a story. And when I hear a teacher say that she got hired at a big university in upper state New York, and she was happy with her job, taking her pay home. 5 years later, that university recruited her husband. He got his first check. He's teaching about basically what she is, same education, same everything. He's a man, though. He was making tremendous amount of money more than her. So they take their checks into personnel, human resources. Why is he making so much more than I am? Oh, that must be a glitch. We'll straighten that out. But did she get those previous years' difference? No. Did they increase her retirements? No. And the problem with me at Goodyear, one of the problems was that they had government contracts. So I didn't really want to go to EEOC and file an investigative charge to find out, in that case, if I was being paid fairly. Because I just rest assured I knew Goodyear would be an equal employer because they had it on their bulletin boards, and I would be paid within a reason. But the mood around the world for this problem is alive and well, and it's not just the women, it's the men. Single, like the young man last night, he already realizes this will touch his life. Thank you, thank you.
And thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Congresswoman Jackie Spear, California.
Madam Chair, thank you, and to our leader, and to our incredible witnesses. You know, I'm sitting here thinking the Lilly and Laura show can be something we can take on the road, and really need to take on the road, because it underscores something that we haven't said loud enough, which is nothing really has changed. Lilly was in the workforce much earlier than Laura, and yet their experience is almost identical. Madam Leader, you'll be happy to know that UC Berkeley's Center on Labor Research just came out with a report about our great city, San Francisco, where there is a living wage, where there is paid sick leave, where there is health benefits that equals about $13 an hour. And low-wage workers in San Francisco are making 80% more than those in the federal minimum wage category. And the study finds that it does not hinder the ability of people and companies. It does not reduce the number of jobs that are out there. In fact, it actually increases it. So that's the good news. But my question to you, Laura, on the heels of what Lilly said about it being a government contractor, were you working for a nonprofit that was getting federal or state or local funds?
Yes, I believe so. They were contracted through an education funding stream called AB 3632, and which is now gone. You know, what I wanted to say earlier when I was asked what we had done to try to make it better, you know, I was telling Moms Rising that I could really speak about all three of these pillars. Because one of the reasons why I didn't want to push it was not just because I couldn't afford a lawyer, but because I became pregnant. And in order to get California's paid family leave, I had to be employed by an agency for 12 months. So I am also a recipient of an incredible law that allowed me some time off to be with my child, and then for my husband to have time with our child later.
So I guess my recommendation would be at the outset that what we could do and ask the president to do by executive order is to require that every federal contractor, every entity that gets federal funds would be required to disclose the salaries that they pay their workers. Because one of the issues here is the transparency and the lack thereof, and the fact that even with the Lilly Ledbetter Act, there's this sense of retaliation, and that's why the Equal Pay Act is so critical. And that could certainly be done by executive order or some facsimile like that to make the case, because it's the intimidation and the fear of retaliation that, that keeps people from even asking the question. So if it was disclosed, much like the salaries are disclosed of every employee of the House, that would, and I know it is for the state legislature in California, why not require that of federal contractors, and then we've at least gone halfway there. I yield back.
I appreciate the recommendation. What you should know that a number of us, and I'd have to check the list to see, I'm sure you probably are on this list. We did write to the president and ask that, in fact, by executive order, that he, with regard to federal contracts, that rescind the secrecy provisions, whether they are by customer policy, and that in order to qualify for a federal contract, you could not have a policy, as I say, or a custom that discriminated against men or women who had an opportunity to discuss their salary. So we will pursue that, but your idea, a recommendation is about disclosing salaries, is another one which we will pursue as well. Thank you. Congresswoman Lois Frankel from Florida.
Okay. Thank you to the panel, to our leaders. First, I'm going to give you good news, I think, because I just saw a report in our newspaper that said women workers in Florida earned 84.9% what men earned in 2012, which is the highest ratio since the Labor Department began charting the state figures 15 years ago. So making a little progress. Not enough, obviously. But I have three questions. One is there any difference in discrimination based upon the income level? In other words, is this discrimination as bad in the lower income as it is in the higher income, middle income? Number one. Number two, I've always heard that as more women go into professions, the salary of the profession drops. So I'm sort of curious if that's true. And then is it that, I want to just pick up on something that I think that Congressman Shea Porter said. Is it that fathers get paid more or men get paid more?
Well, on the last point, I mean, there are lots of studies on all these issues. On the last point, many of the studies do show that fathers are rewarded in the workplace compared to men who aren't fathers, and that mothers are punished relative to women who aren't mothers. But other studies don't show such big effects for children, for the presence of children, because we know that young women are also, before they have children, are also paid less than young men. So, and some of the studies don't show a father bonus. So the evidence isn't totally strong on that one. You asked, is there discrimination in the low-wage labor market by gender and race and ethnicity, and there certainly is. And immigrants in general tend to be paid less, by the way, than the native-born often. And this can happen at the low end of the labor market, too. One of the ways it happens is that many of the low-wage women's occupations require quite a bit of training and certification, certified nurse assistant. And most of the low-wage men's jobs don't require those levels. And so really, those low-wage women's jobs should be middle-wage jobs, but they're not. They're low-wage. But even looking at the same occupations, often you find a gender wage difference. It's smaller because the wages are lower. You're going to get a bigger pay gap at the upper end, as I mentioned before. And I'm sorry, I forgot your third question.
Yeah, the other question is whether, I'll just give an example, because I heard this. I'm a has-been lawyer, but I had heard, when I went to law school, it was maybe 4% women in the law profession. Now I think it's 50%. But I have heard that lawyers earn less now than they used to. And someone said to me, well, that's because there's more women in becoming lawyers. But is that a trend in professions?
Yeah, there is quite a bit of research on that. In general, yes. When women and minorities enter an occupation, you often see the wage rate fall. This has been proven for the state of California. by two economists who were in California, Bill Bealby and the other guy, maybe Jim Barron, something like that. I can send you that study since you're from California. And the American Psychological Association just mentioned it to me. The women in psychology are growing. The wages are falling in psychology. There's been a kind of debate. Is it because the field becomes less desirable, so men leave it and move on to other fields, and then that field becomes more open to women and minorities? Or is there actually like punishment in the wage rate when women and minorities enter fields? And I think, again, there's evidence for both sides, but it's a pretty well established phenomenon. So it just goes to show that, what I was asked before, what can you possibly do to make this never happen? The only thing you can do to make it never happen or stop happening, you have to constantly battle it. When even a state that does a pay equity adjustment, 10 years later, the wage rate has gone back to where it was. I mean, there is no substitute for constant pressure all the time on these issues. That's just the way it is.
Congressman Swalwell, California.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Leader. Laura, going back to your story, we're glad you're pushing it now. And we're not going to stop until you and every woman receives the 23 cents additional cents that you're owed. And so you do have supporters here. We come from a diverse area, and we have a very diverse workforce in the East Bay. And so I am interested in learning more about not just women who are not being paid the same to do the same work as men, but what the penalty we are finding for minority women in our area. And my own mom works in San Ramon, so this issue is important to me as well, to make sure that working women receive pay equity. And my question for you is, locally, in our area where high-tech jobs continue to grow, especially in advanced manufacturing, our laboratories, biotech, what do you think we can do, Laura, to raise more awareness, put more pressure on the companies who are hiring? We'd rather see them do it, before we have to finally get this Republican Congress to act on this issue. But what do you think we can do at home to raise awareness and make sure the companies do it before this Republican Congress?
Geez, that's a tough question. I'm not a politician. I don't make rules. I'm a psychotherapist, so I hear the psychological and social and emotional impact these issues have on women and families. But one thing that I would be interested in would maybe be some sort of consequence. They should have to pay back the difference in wage. I think that should be standardized. If we're talking about equity, there's no better way to start that than to recompensate. I don't know if that's too radical, but I don't think so. And, I know personally from our area, I have many friends who are in the tech field, and people do talk about their salaries. I have the privilege as a psychotherapist to know about this confidential information, and women in tech do get paid a lot less. And not only that, but in tech, though some companies are better than others, there are companies who don't want families involved. They want to hire single people, particularly men, because they don't have to go back to their homes, and they want to squeeze every hour that they can out of them, which I feel is an atrocity to families. As I also work with children, and I see the effect that it has when their parents aren't home and they're being raised by other people, many of them which are the minorities that are in our area. You see many people of color nannies. And I see the effect that it has on our children. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about.
Sure, and I look forward to working with you back in the East Bay on this.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'll just be very brief. Thank you to each of the witnesses because it's been very enlightening testimony. And as you sat here, I recall when I worked for a federal contractor many years ago, actually signing off on a personnel manual that I wouldn't discuss my wages, and I never did. You know, I think back on that now, and I don't think it was until about 10 years after that, as a young employee, that I even had an idea that there was something wrong about that. And then just before coming to Congress, I worked in philanthropy and recall a trade association doing a study of equally situated philanthropists and finding out that women across the board in the area of family foundations, which I ran, were paid about $25,000 a year less than their male counterparts in philanthropy. And so as I sit here listening to you, what I hear is it actually doesn't matter what generation, it actually doesn't matter where, it doesn't pretty much matter what field, it just happens, and it's really staggering. I'm wondering about these regional differences because I come from Prince George's County in Maryland. We just enacted an $11.50 an hour minimum wage. Montgomery County, our neighboring county, did the same thing. The District of Columbia did the same thing because we wanted a regional wage. And Dr. Hartman, I wonder if you could tell us about how to account for these regional differences but still maintain some kind of baseline for all employees across the country to try to close some of these gaps, because some of my colleagues will say, well, it's different in Maryland than it is in Wyoming, and then that somehow justifies basically a 30-cent difference in the wage gap for women in Wyoming versus the women in Maryland. So I wonder if you could talk about that a bit.
Well, one good thing about Maryland and D.C. is that the wage gap tends to be a little bit smaller mainly because we have more public government people. And actually, the government is one sector with less discrimination. Teachers, for example, in the same positions are in almost identical pay. So, but then again, more men become principals and superintendents, so there's always ways. I think, the importance of the minimum wage is really to raise the bottom in the South. It is the southern states that pay the least, and when you look at the data from the Economic Policy Institute, you'll see what a larger share of the wage force would be brought up by this increase to 2010 in those southern states than in the, to 10.10 an hour in 2016, in those southern states and in the northern states and the coastal states, the Midwest, et cetera, the mountain states, those could be disadvantaged also. I think it's just an important economic principle that you have to build up the floor. If you don't build up the floor, then regions can compete with each other, as we've seen in the U.S., businesses moving to low-wage states. So it's a way to make sure that everybody's on an equal playing field. Yes, the high-wage states, California, New York, this area, they will pass higher state minimums, and they should, but I don't think that's any reason to introduce a regional element into the federal minimum, which I have often heard debated in these halls. I think it's just a bad idea. Our other, many of our other programs are not affected that way. Medicaid, we don't say, you'll get less down there. I mean, it's just so important to have that level playing field. And by the way, Australia has a minimum wage of virtually $20 an hour, and their dollar's worth about the same as ours. So it can be done in a high-wage country. That should be the minimum. And in fact, EPI, again, studies show that had the minimum wage kept up with the growth in productivity that we have experienced, that has not gone down to workers, it's only up there, captured by the top 1%, the minimum wage here would be $20 an hour.
Thank you very much. Congressman Andrews, New Jersey.
I thank my co-chair. I thank the witnesses for their really exhilarating eloquence here this afternoon. Thank you very, very much. Your testimony has served to remind us that although legal tools are essential, they are not in and of themselves adequate to address this problem. We certainly need more forceful and better remedies for women and men in some circumstances to pursue these claims. We certainly need prohibitions against firing people or punishing them for finding out information about salaries on the jobs. But we also need to heed the call of the President's call for high-quality pre-kindergarten for every child in the country. Since women still are very often the primary caregiver the absence of that quality child care has a disproportionate effect on women. We still certainly need to fully implement the Affordable Care Act so that some of the burdens that women have suffered in the insurance marketplace are alleviated and women are treated equally. Am I missing anything? I just asked the panel, if we fully enforce the Affordable Care Act, if we really bolstered our early childhood education, and if we gave these legal tools that have been discussed in the bills here, are there other steps you think are necessary to finally reach this goal of equality?
In some cases, I know the company that I worked for, they hid a lot of things from outside auditings and what have you. They're really shrewd. They, you know, even if the law and they're coming in someone from the EOC to check, they hide it. They hide it extremely well. So whatever the program is, it'll have to be very good to catch these companies that are doing this. But also there are some companies that have realized if they will start treating their employees fairly and equitably, and the employees know it, they're more successful. And there are a few who are, and a lot of them are even introducing child care for their employees, wellness care. So many programs are being added, and if they could maybe get some tax relief or some incentive to get them to do that. But the auditors who check them will have to be very shrewd.
Thank you.
I wanted to thank our panelists today. As I said, it's about the personal stories as well as the weight of the data that brings us to this agenda about when women succeed, America succeeds. And just to make a quick point to Laura, have the Paycheck Fairness Bill been enacted into law? When you brought your paycheck stub and your husband's, they'd have had to give you a hell of a better answer than they did. Otherwise, we would be placing a penalty on them, thereby the necessity for legislation. The leader and I know she'll speak about this in a second, and the both of us will, we both wrote down, Laura, when you talked about valuable. And one of the things that we have said all along in this process, that one of the reasons that we are dealing with some of these issues today and these serious economic imbalances for women is because the work that women do has not been valued or respected in our society. And our purpose, our singular purpose, is in looking at this agenda for women and their families is to, if they're not going to do it on their own, we're going to legislate that there are the equities that are necessary, and we take away, and all of this, I think we go back first and foremost on the issue of secrecy and lifting that veil of secrecy so that women can participate, and then we'll carry on with the rest of the agenda. Madam Leader, if you would close it.
Yes, I want to join you in thanking our distinguished witnesses, Laura Moy, Lilly Ledbetter, and Dr. Heidi Hartman for their excellent testimony and for not only the facts and figures that they bring, but the value of their opinions on this subject. And the word value, it's really, they don't value women in the workplace as much as they should, but they don't really value all workers. If they did, we would raise the minimum wage, of which 60% of women make the minimum wage. So that's why we say when women succeed, America succeeds, because in lifting the minimum wage, we lift not only the wages of all workers, but as Dr. Hartman said, we lift the floor. We lift the floor so that other wages will rise. I want to thank Congresswoman Chairwoman DeLauro and Chairwoman Andrews for their leadership on the Steering and Policy Committee, not only on this issue today, which I salute Donna Edwards and Doris Matsui on as well, but as something with a oneness and integrity about job creation when we brought in people to talk about investing in infrastructure in America to create good paying jobs here in America right now, about when the economy isn't working as we have the challenge now with unemployment insurance, and the stories that people told us about that are just stunning, whether it's raising the minimum wage or paycheck fairness Lilly Ledbetter's issues regarding the court case and the rest and all that Dr. Hartman told us. But it all has a oneness to it. And it's about an economy that works for everyone. That's what the president talked about last night. It was interesting to me, we had the president of Columbia, the country, not the university, Laura, in to see us recently, and he said that they were going to do, their economy was going to grow this way and that way and this and that. And I said, what is your secret? Share it with us. He said, we're going to grow our economy in a very special way because we're going to involve many more women in the growth of our economy in our country. And just last week, that was a few weeks ago, just last week, the Japanese said that their future economic growth depended on the role that women will play in their economy. So this isn't just about correcting injustices. It would be justified if it were only about that. But it is about a larger issue. As Laura has pointed out, whether it's this psychological impact on our children or the direct impact on our innovation as a country. So this is so very important. You are central to it. This committee has done very much to, because our colleagues will not let us have bipartisan, won't let us focus in the proper way on these issues, we come with the Steering and Policy Committee. So I want to salute Congresswoman DeLauro and Congresswoman Edwards Andrews for what they are doing, and Congresswoman Edwards for her leadership role on our Women's Initiative. But all of us are enormously grateful, and members who couldn't be here send you their regards, and we will send them back your messages. So thank you, Laura. I'll see you back home. Thank you, Dr. Lilly Ledbetter. We don't know where in the world we're going to see you. Everywhere. And Heidi, Dr. Hartman, thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you all very much. The meeting is adjourned.
Dr. Hartman, can we get your study, your California study?
Yes, I'm going to
Okay.
send that. There were so many people here from California. I'm going to send it to everybody.
Oh, thank you. Oh.
I worked with Lilly for years on the Ledbetter Act, now the I co-chair the Paycheck Fairness Act.
Yay.
And we're from